And we are back. Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. This is part 2 of my talk with Jake Coyne, whereas we go through the different ways that the Nuggets can get better this offseason. Very excited to have Jake on. I told him I was going to have him on for an hour. We're going to blow right through that, but I've got a hard out. It's going to be fine, Jake. Really appreciate your flexibility. Thank you for stopping by. Okay, we just went through a variety of things on the taxpayer mid-level exception front. Was there one name that really stood out there among all of the others that if you had to pick one, you would go that direction for Denver?
Probably the most unrealistic of the ones we talked about, but he's a guy I highlighted, and it would be Trey Mann. He'd be the one I would look at. Just providing that scoring punch, being able to break defenses down off the dribble, he'd be the one I would target.
The injury concern with him, he did only play, I think, 13 games this season before going out with a back injury. Nuggets fans hear back injury and they immediately cringe. Do you get worried about that, or is that just a mechanism that Denver can acquire somebody like that? Like they have to take some chances.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's a worry. I would just say, the thing you have to realize is that there's a reason you can get a guy at a certain number. Maybe it's injury concerns, maybe it's other off the court concerns or chemistry concerns. There's a reason you can maybe get a guy at a certain number. And if Trey Mann was playing all 82 games, he'd probably be a way higher price than Denver could afford. So definitely some risk there, but I think it's one that's worth taking in this case.
Okay. Well, I like it. I think that Denver needs more on the dribble scoring, like somebody who can on the ball scoring, off the dribble scoring. I mix both of those together, of course. They need somebody who can be creative, and I think that he would absolutely meet that criteria. Definitely more of like he could absolutely shoot it from deep as well. So lots of things I think you could address there. Okay, kind of circling back to some other candidates. Let's kind of pivot into more of the minimum guys. I said I had more. I've got, I think, 11 or 12 guys that I want to throw your way. We can kind of go through the positional spectrum once again. We talked previously in the previous episode that minimums were going to be more like frequent for Denver, regardless of what they do, regardless of the trades that they make. They're going to have to fill out the roster with some minimum contracts. So getting it right, at least getting one of, whether it's these guys or somebody else that you can add and say, hey, we think you could play a role. We think you could be significant here. You got to get at least one of these guys that can play a consistent role in the rotation. So without further ado, let's go through some of these guys. A name that we'll start with that I think you're very familiar with, Monte Morris. Monte Morris and Aaron Holiday, 2 point guards that I want you to compare and contrast a little bit. Just Aaron Holiday, more of a defensive option, somebody that excelled in Houston, didn't really play often in the playoffs for them, but Monte Morris didn't really play that much for Phoenix and honestly got passed up by Colin Gillespie in the rotation over there. What do you think? Would you want a reunion with Monte, trying to bring him back in as maybe a third point guard?
Yeah, I think it would be worth, talking about that and possibly doing it. I think the familiarity factor there is a positive thing in this case. We know he works well with Jokic. We saw a lot of him playing with Jokic, and we know it works. And I think both of these guys, Holiday and Morris, I don't think either of them would be blocking Pickett, where if Pickett came in and looked really good, like neither of those guys are the type where you couldn't say, hey, we're going to play Pickett a little more than you going forward. I don't think they'd have a problem with that. Whereas like a Westbrook, I think he's such a big name and a big personality that like if Pickett comes back looking really improved next year, it might still be hard to say, hey, Russ, like we're going to play this guy over you. That would be tough. So yeah. Both of those guys are really good in the sense that they could handle backup guard duties, I think. But they could also bump down to third string if you're getting a lot out of Pickett. So
I like it. And that's one reason to maybe not throw your TPMLE at one of those guys, because there would be an implied expectation we need you to play at that point. Whereas with Pickett, you could assume that he could jump somebody in the rotation at some point, and or at least that's the hope that you would have. Three different wing kind of shooting guard candidates: Gary Harris, Keon Johnson, and DeAnthony Melton. Gary Harris, of course, team option for Orlando. It seems like they're probably going to decline that. Keon Johnson also has a team option for Brooklyn. They're probably going to decline that as well, although I'm not really sure what Brooklyn's going to do. They probably want as much cap space as they possibly can get. And then DeAnthony Melton, coming off of a torn ACL, was on a 1-year make good contract with Golden State, and then tore it, and then was kind of used as a trade option to get them somebody else. Who of those three would you take a chance on?
Yeah, so that's a good one. Of those three, I would probably pick. This is going to surprise people probably, but DeAnthony Melton, I think I would take a chance on him.
I love his game.
I think, yeah, I just love how he plays. I think he provides a good veteran presence. I think if you're getting him at, I don't know, let's call it 80% of what he was pre-injury, I think that's probably still above what current Gary Harris and current Keon Johnson can provide. So yeah, I would probably target of those three Melton. But, Gary Harris is a guy I also highlighted in my report. We know he can do some things well. He's a solid defender still. Shots a little hit and miss, which can be tough, but I think he'd be good here as well on a minimum.
You want to win the press conference, you bring back Monte Morris and Gary Harris. I'll say that. But if you want to win some games, maybe getting a little bit more aggressive. And I love Melton's game. I think that he can space, he can go off the dribble, he plays great defense, mostly from like an aggressiveness standpoint. But he had like 3% steal rate on several of his seasons, just being an aggressive defender with his hands. So like Denver, I think if we're seeing anything from OKC and Indiana, you need more guys like that. You need more guys that can get aggressive with their hands, force turnovers. Denver's not a turnover-focused team, so you need some of your perimeter guys to come in and be able to do that. Like he would be great.
Yeah, and I think Denver, I think one thing they lack defensively is just sort of a quickness and a speed factor. And of those three guys we listed, we'll see what Melton is coming off injury and stuff. But I think he's more likely to provide that than those others.
Moving up the positional spectrum to the small forward spot, Talen Horton-Tucker, somebody you named, Zaire Williams, and Marjon Beauchamp, somebody who I long envied and wanted, even over Christian Braun back in the 2022 draft. As it turns out, Christian Braun turned out pretty good.
Yes, he did. Yeah, those guys, I would say, so starting with Horton-Tucker, I think he's kind of become lost in the mix in recent years. Some stints with the Jazz and then the Bulls. You don't hear a ton about him anymore, but at one point, this was a guy that Lakers fans were really hyping up as
can't touch him, untouchable.
some really great player, and I don't think he's that, obviously, but he's sort of maybe similar to Trey Mann that we talked about in a way where I think he's probably the best scorer that you can reasonably expect on a minimum contract, unless there's guys I'm not thinking of. But, if you're just looking, we need a guy to just come in and pour in some points on a minimum contract. I would say THT is one of, if not the best option for that. And then those other guys you mentioned, I think definitely with Beauchamp, there's like some hope of possible upside there that the Nuggets might be able to sell themselves on. Like, hey, maybe there's something that Jokic can unlock here. And so, each of those guys have their own different upsides to them. If I were to pick one of the three, for me, it would probably be Horton-Tucker. But if you also had Trey Mann, right? Like, I don't know if you need two of those kinds of guys, right? But just speaking independently, I would probably go THT out of this group.
So you have a type. You want the scorers off the bench, somebody who can provide a little bit of juice for the team. I'm starting to see a trend here.
I think it's just been a thing that Denver's been missing for a long time. They don't really have a guy. Westbrook did provide it to a degree, but we all know some of the issues that also can come with Westbrook at times. But yeah, I mean, you think of some of these bench scorers, they're not always the greatest efficiency, but they can come in and they can win you regular season games just because they get really hot. And I think that's something that Denver has been missing for a number of years.
100%. Okay. Power forward, Ben Simmons. What's up? Let's see it.
Is this a tier of his own, Ben Simmons tier?
Tier of his own, minimum contract. Let's go.
Hey, I mean, the guy looked kind of scared to dribble past half court in the playoffs, which is a little bit of a concern.
When he airballed the hook shot against, like he put his shoulder into Jokic and then turned around and threw up a right-handed hook shot that missed the rim by 2 feet from about 5 feet away. I was like, okay, I don't know about this. But then again, like he played great defense. I'll say that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. I've always kind of been a sucker for like really big guards. And so Ben Simmons was a guy that I really liked at one point. There might be something there where you can pull the best out of him. And, you know, we are talking minimum contracts here. So it's not necessarily a guy you have to play in the playoffs. And so I think if Denver gets to the point where they say, hey, let's take a flyer on this and maybe it'll work out really well, I think it's a good option. And then from Simmons' perspective, I don't know if there's a better team to possibly help him extend his career than Denver.
It'd be an interesting one. There's something to, like, hypothetically Russell Westbrook walks away. Ben Simmons wouldn't be the worst replacement in terms of, hey, you need a somebody who can get downhill, who can create for other people, who isn't going to take a lot of shots, but could potentially set the table for others. I could see that being at least intriguing in some ways. 2 center candidates for you, Paul Reed and Daniel Tice. How are you feeling about those kinds of guys?
Yeah. Daniel Tice is a guy that might have a little bit left in the tank. I mean, he's not going to be a name that pops off the page, but it's like I mentioned earlier, the backup center market is typically really thin and you're not going to get a ton of great options. I think he'd be one that you'd have to ask yourself, would we rather do this or bring back DeAndre Jordan? I think there's some debate there about who would be a better player next year. And then Paul Reed, he was a guy I looked at and I kind of researched, did some stuff on. I'm not sure how gettable he will be for Denver. I think Detroit might be interested in bringing him back at a number that's above what Denver could offer. But if he does hit the market, I'm not sure he'll get any MLE offers just because of the limitations on that out there. And so if Denver could get him, I'm all for it. Totally a great target.
Yeah, I look at his the situation behind Duran and Stewart and think I'm not sure if Paul Reed can realistically think that he's going to get many minutes there. But I mean, maybe they were to move one of those other guys at some point and he becomes more of a focal point backup center, in which case he's not playing behind Nikola Jokic. He's playing behind one of Jalen Duran or Isaiah Stewart, which is a little bit different. So would be interesting to at least talk about. Okay. Like you said, the backup center market, not great. I think that Denver probably should be trying to move on from DeAndre Jordan, but they may not have much of a better alternative at this point. And so, like, the fact that DeAndre played the 9th most minutes on the team last year was a travesty to me.
Yeah, not a great look there. Yeah, Denver had a lot of
they have Nikola Jokic. DeAndre Jordan played the 9th most minutes on the team. I just need to make sure to highlight that.
It's a good. I didn't even realize that until you pointed it out. But yeah, Denver had some rough roster spots at the back end that felt a little wasted to me with Holmes and Chanchar, who I personally don't see as an NBA player, but I get the reason that he's on the roster.
Whiffing on Saric as well.
Yep. And, just one other backup center name I'd throw out that I didn't put in my report because I have no idea what this guy's market is just Marvin Bagley. There's some chatter that Memphis probably wants to bring him back, and I think that probably does make sense. But he's a name that if he hits the market and Memphis isn't bringing him back, I'd make a call on him.
He was the only guy that didn't look like he was peeing down his leg against OKC. Like literally the only guy on their team. So I don't blame him. Like they should be trying to bring back somebody like that. So that's hey, good on them if they're able to do it. But they also have Zach Edey and Jay Huff and Brandon Clark and Jaren Jackson and a whole bunch of these other guys. So like it's a tough backup center market. I'll say that. Okay. Now everybody's been waiting for an hour. We're going to talk about trades. Denver has stated they want to focus on internal development, which to me focuses on we're not trading our starting five. Whether they like extend Christian Brown or not, that's a different discussion that maybe we could have at some point. Denver's salary that they can play around with if they don't trade those guys is very small. Like Zeke Naji is the largest salary number at 8.1. Then you've got Dario Saric at 5.5 expiring, somewhere around there. And that's basically it for the large salaries, unless you're trading some of the younger guys like a Peyton Watson, who I think makes like 4.3. Julian Strouthers at 2.6. Denver's going to be in a very interesting spot. They also only have, like, they have to match 100% of the salary that they send out because they're over the first apron. And they only have one first that they can trade in 2031 or 2032, but you can't trade both because of the Stepien rule. They can use in a trade plus a 2032 second rounder after that becomes available July 1st, plus pick swaps in 2026, 2028, and 2030. They could also swap 2032 or 2031, but I'm not sure why you would do that if you're trading, if you want to keep those picks available to you. So did I hit on everything from a trade perspective that you would hit on?
Yeah, I think that would cover it. I think it's obvious kind of why Josh Kroenke in some of his press conferences has sort of given us the impression that they're not going to do a whole lot. And it's for no other reason than it's really hard to move salaries when your only salary between Michael Porter in the high 30 millions and Zeke Naji at 8 million is Aaron Gordon at like 22. And I just don't see a world where he's worth trading right now. I some people say, oh, trade him at his high or whatever, but
good luck telling that to Nikola Jokic, by the way.
Yeah, I just don't see there's no way. I just don't think it's possible. There's a reason I didn't do a Aaron Gordon trade in my report. And yeah, it makes it really tough. I mean, if you go back and look at some of my reports from years ago, I always said Denver needs to have more of these mid-range salary guys that they can trade. And I used to point at teams like the Clippers and I'd say, oh, they have it right. They have all these mid-range salaries. And that's what Denver's missing right now. Maybe had they brought back KCP, maybe you have another one in there that you could use. We obviously know they didn't. And so they're kind of,
then again, the KCP salary would not necessarily be a great deal for a lot of people, right? I'm thinking that if Orlando has to do the same thing for them, they're not going to get a whole bunch of positive value back on that trade.
No, I don't think so either. I think ideally you're hoping if he had come back to Denver that he looks a little better than he did in Orlando, and maybe that value's a little better. But I mean, yeah, it's going to be hard for Denver to pull off anything just because of the salary numbers that they're working with.
Going to be fascinating. So with that in mind, there's only a couple of different mechanisms so that they can actually get this stuff done. I've got a few trades here that I want to run by you. Some of these I just dropped in the article that I just released on Thursday morning. One is Ayo Dosunmu, who we've talked about ad nauseum, talked about with my guy Swipe on Locked On as well. Denver gets Ayo Dosunmu, Chicago gets Julian Strawther, Dario Saric, and a 2030 first-round pick swap. To me, that feels like the requisite value to get somebody, and Chicago justifies it because Ayo Dosunmu is an expiring contract. They already have Kobe White and Josh Giddey. They're trying to get some other different values around their other players, and they're trying to extend their window a little bit and not have an asset walk away. What kind of is that a good framework for a deal like that for them? And is that something that you think Denver should consider?
Yeah, Yeah, I think another selling point for Chicago even is just that Saric, you can bring him over and then buy him out, and you cut a little bit more salary off. Um, I noted in my report you can buy him out and then stretch him, and you save even more money. And so it would save Chicago a few $1 million if they did that from Dosunmu's salary. And yeah, I agree with the value. When I was doing my report, I probably valued Io a little bit lower than just like a flat out first round pick. I don't know that he's worth quite that, but I think he's close. And so I think your value here makes sense because I think Julian is somewhere below a first round pick as well. And then you have that swap in there. So I think value wise, it's good. For Denver, definitely think Io is a great target. He's not a weak point on either side of the ball, which is something that I think Denver needs. And just another guy that can break things down off the dribble, which I think would be a big help for Denver offensively.
Do you want me to keep throwing trades at you, or do you want to throw in a variety that you have cooked up already? Because I can do either. I've got plenty.
Yeah, keep throwing some at me, and maybe we'll see where it goes from there.
If Denver wants to go with the other Chicago guard, Kobe White, who also is on an expiring contract, maybe they don't want to pay him. Maybe they'd rather pay Ayo. Chicago gets Zeke Naji, Peyton Watson, and a protected 2031 first-round pick. Is that a more requisite value for Kobe? And if you had to pick between those two deals, which one would you do?
Yeah, I'm trying to think on the value part of it first. I think Chicago might ask for a little bit more, maybe a couple swaps or at least one swap. If you complete it post July 1st, maybe you're throwing in that 2032 second rounder. I could see something like that. But yeah, definitely right in that range. As far as which of those two deals I would do, I'd probably do the Io deal first. For no other reason than that I think Kobe's going to demand a lot more money going forward than Io does. And they'll both be due for some money here soon. And so
next year, actually, they're both the expiring deals.
Yep. And so I would do the Io deal first, and then, whatever like Nickeil Alexander-Walker gets this year in free agency, I would kind of target that number if I'm Denver for Io on a next deal. So, and I think it would be reasonable. So I would definitely do that one.
Could they agree to an extension with Io immediately if that were the case, or is that something that they'd have to wait for?
I'm pretty sure they'd have to wait for it. I'd have to go back and look at his current deal, but I think the length of it makes it so that they would have to wait and I
think it was a 2-year deal, I want to say, as opposed, because if it was a 3-year deal, then it would, like, they'd have the full bird rights to be able to get it done, right? Mm-hmm. Am I crazy there?
Yeah, I think they'll have the full bird rights just based on his tenure with Chicago.
Thank God. They've needed full bird rights on some of these guys. That's something that they've been missing and trying to extend players like Bruce Brown and things like that.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it has to be at least a 3-year deal for him to be extendable. And I don't think it was, if I'm remembering how his whole process went. But I think you'd have enough bird rights on him that you could probably retain him unless something goes really wrong.
All right, moving on for a different pick. I'm going to try to go quickly here because we're on a timetable. Denver gets Jose Alvarado. New Orleans gets Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, and a 2030 first-round swap. Very similar kind of deal, different kind of construction. How would you feel about it?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's probably Alvarado. I'd have a hard time figuring out what his value is, especially under a new GM. But I think it's probably right in that range. For Denver, I would do it. I think he provides a different type of ability from the guard position that would be really interesting for Denver. And I think he could play off Jokic in some lineups, and it would probably help him on the offensive side of the ball. So yeah, I would do that one for sure.
I like Jose. Had a little bit of a down year from a shooting and like efficiency standpoint, but everybody in New Orleans did. So who knows? Like, they're trying to build up assets. They're trying to build around Zion. Maybe this is one way that they could think about doing it. The next one, clear out for Cooper Flagg. Denver gets PJ Washington and Olivier Maxence Prosper. Dallas gets Peyton Watson, Zeke Naji, Dario Saric, and a protected 2031 first round pick. That one is your like pre this version of the CBA kind of trade that makes a lot of sense, that everybody had used to do, that hasn't really been done much lately. What do you think about PJ Washington?
So real quick, throw me out the Denver outgoing stuff again.
Denver sends Peyton Watson, Zeke Naji, Dario Saric, and a protected 2031 first round pick. They get back PJ Washington and Olivier Maxence Prosper.
Yeah, so this is another case where I think Dallas can do that and then buy out Saric and save a little bit of money. So that makes sense to me there. Washington would definitely command that first round pick, especially with Zeke as a returning salary. So yeah, I think that all makes sense. I would take it, especially depending what other moves Denver does. If they were to say move a Michael Porter, I think PJ Washington is a guy that, even if not your full-time starter, he can play in that slot where Porter was in a stagger or whatever you need to do. So I think that'd be a good one.
I felt pretty good about that one because I wrote about it for the article and realized, oh, wait, the biggest reason for them to do that is because they've got Cooper freaking Flagg coming in. They need to clear out some space. It's just one of those things that they're going to have to, they're going to start Cooper Flagg and they're going to start Anthony Davis and they're going to start probably Derek Lively. I'd expect them to keep going young around some of those guys to try to get as good as they can. Finally, Denver gets Jonas Valanciunas from Sacramento. They get Russell Westbrook and Zeke Naji straight up.
That's a good one. I would say Sacramento would ask for more for taking on the Zeke contract. As I said, Zeke and Westbrook, right?
But they get their starting point guard.
They do get that. I think Zeke requires a little bit of assets to move off that one.
Maybe a pick swap.
Yeah. I don't think it would be the first round pick. But yeah, the pick swap would make some sense there. That would be, I think that'd be a home run for Denver. Trading Westbrook like that would hopefully be a good thing. Hopefully you don't piss off some agents with that type of deal. But yeah, I think that's a really ideal one because you're taking away one rotation guy in Westbrook, but you're bringing back a definite rotation guy at a position of weakness, which is backup center. And I think that you can more easily fill the backup guard spot than you can the backup center spot. So even if you have to add a little bit there from Denver's side, I think it would be worth it.
Feel like I'm cooking. Feel like I've done pretty well here with some of these moves. Okay. All of those did not involve a single starter. Now we're going to throw in a couple of deals that do involve starters. The first one, Denver gets Cam Johnson. Brooklyn gets Michael Porter Jr., a 2031 first round pick, and a 2032 first round swap. How would you feel about it? Is that the right value? Because I was looking at the differences in salary cap numbers. That is an $18 million difference that they would have to take on. And I think that Cam Johnson is viewed as a value add, and Michael Porter is not necessarily viewed in that light.
Yeah. Cam Johnson is a guy that I think, like, if we just disregard salaries and we say you need to replace Michael Porter with a player who fits what you want to see in that spot, I think Cam Johnson would probably be like top 3 or something of who you would just pick to refill that spot. And so great target, pretty good contract. His contract does have some weird stuff with incentives that make it kind of difficult to work around certain tax aprons if you're pushing up against them. But the salary number is low enough that I think you love the deal. You love the player. From Brooklyn's side, I'd probably ask for a little bit more.
Denver doesn't have that much more to give.
I know. I'd probably try to pull away one of Denver's like young first round pick guys, like whether that's a Deron Holmes or Julian Strother. I'd probably target one of them as opposed to Brown or Watson, who are due for money here this summer. Would Denver do it that way? I don't know. Depends on how much they value those two young guys. But I think Cam Johnson is worth a little bit of pain from Denver's side. I think you'd feel some pain in that trade with all those assets going out, but it would be hard to come up with a lot better of a player that you could get in that spot.
Do you open up the non-taxpayer mid-level in that situation?
So you'd cut off, I believe, like 16 million in guaranteed salary. I want to say Cam Johnson has something like 4 million in 3 or 4 million in incentives. So you do
That's
have
a
to
lot.
account for that. Yeah.
I forgot. I didn't realize that when going through this.
Yeah, it's a heavy incentive one. So you do have to account for that when you're talking about tax aprons and stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't know if they would have it right away, but if they did it and then you buy out Saric and stretch him to cut off, say, 4 million from his number this year, then I think you're probably talking about being in the range of being able to use that. So
could you justify throwing in Saric along with Strother in the deal? And could Brooklyn, like if you're throwing in the necessary assets in order to get it done, let's say it's a 2031 first, a 2032 swap, and Strother, if Brooklyn could justify that from their end, could you justify it in terms of, hey, now you're definitely clearing up the amount of space?
Yeah, I mean, from Denver's perspective, I think you could justify that for sure, because when you open up that taxpayer mid-level, let's say you open up a majority of it, you don't have to use it all. You don't have to use it all on one player. You could split it into two, and those two would still be each making more than the taxpayer mid-level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you could actually outbid other teams with that taxpayer mid-level using the big mid-level, and you could get 2 rotation guys, and then you're also getting Cam Johnson. So you're really adding 3 rotation guys there. So I think that would be a good move.
I like it. I think it's a good way to get creative. There's another way that you previously discussed involving Brooklyn, involving Boston, like Drew Holiday. Like, is that somebody that Denver should be targeting? Like, maybe that's your ideal 6th man in this situation where you're moving Michael Porter and you're getting back Drew Holiday to be your super 6th man off the bench.
Yeah, so that was a deal I was finding. I was kind of thinking of, let's say the Nets want 2 first-round picks for Johnson. How can the Nuggets get that to them and still get Johnson? And so I found this deal that works money-wise where if Denver sends Michael Porter and one of their young rotation pieces to Brooklyn and their 2031 pick, and then they get Cam Johnson from Brooklyn and Drew Holiday from Boston.
Whew.
And you send Dario to Boston, and then Boston sends a first-round pick to Brooklyn because they're straight up salary dumping Drew Holiday and saving about 30 million in cap hit this year.
Along with the tax bill, the necessary, like the money that they would be paying over, that would be insane.
It would be an insane amount of savings from them, and it would enable them to like keep Derek White, who I think they want to keep.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth probably one of their lesser first round picks. So like I wouldn't give their 2026 pick or something, right? But it's a deal that makes sense for all teams involved. I think it does push Denver up against the aprons pretty good. So it's a little tough there. I think I had Zeke going to Brooklyn in that deal too to make the money work. But Brooklyn gets 2 first-round picks. They get a young piece from Denver, and they get Michael Porter. And then Denver gets Cam Johnson and Drew Holiday. And you're kind of looking at it, 2 veteran rotation pieces. So definitely like a 2K type trade where it's probably galaxy braining it a little bit. But I thought it made sense for all teams involved.
I like it. I think that there's plenty of ways that Denver could go about it. But like you said, I start to get into these situations, into like going through the trade machine, and I start to see like in real time, okay, so I am trade machining this. This is not realistic anymore. At this point, these teams have to have a motive in order to do it. But I do think that's a good motive, especially for Boston. They're in a very unique position, and Brooklyn's in a very unique position. So being able to take advantage of that would be great. But again, you have to have a general manager in house to be able to do that. So I don't think like we're probably living in fantasy land here on these, but it's still worth talking about because it is an option. By the way, go ahead.
I was going to say, while we're on the topic of Michael Porter, I'll bring up one really controversial one that I removed from my report, but that I'll put out there just so people can get mad at me about it.
Nice.
I was thinking about how Denver could sort of get back some assets, like refill their stockpile of draft picks that's taken a really big hit. And I was looking at a report from the trade deadline that was from a really good Phoenix source that said Bradley Beal would waive his no trade clause to go to Denver and a couple other places. And I was thinking about this deal. I want to hear what your thoughts would be on it.
Okay.
Is what if Denver moved Michael Porter, Zeke, Dario, and I think it would take like a Strother or something. But they get Bradley Beal and they get two of Phoenix's first round picks. So if people remember, Phoenix traded their one pick they had and they got 3 back from Utah.
What years were they?
One is this year. I believe it's 25, 27, and 29.
Oh, okay. See, why that makes a difference to me is if Denver was doubling up on picks in 2026 and 2028 and 2030 and things like that, it would mean less. But Denver should be trying to get back picks in 2025, 27, and 29 so that they could screw with that step being rolled and say, we don't need to worry about that anymore. We can send out our own picks, which people I assume would think are more valuable if they're like trying to bet against Denver's future, for example.
Yeah.
They should absolutely be trying to do that. So now, is it worth Bradley Beal? That's a sketchy one. That's a tough one. That's like, can you justify that? Denver does need more on-ball creation.
You're also dumping your bad salary in Saric and Zeke, right? So that's the also bonus there. You're getting the worst contract in the NBA, to be clear. Bradley Beal is the worst contract in the NBA. But they're giving you 2 first-round picks for getting off bad salary and unfortunately giving up Michael Porter in the deal. But it was just a deal I had thought of when I was looking at how to recoup some assets. So just curious whether you would do it or not.
Man, I would have to sit down and really I would have to really think about it because with Beal, could you justify having because I've thought about this from the Zach LaVine perspective, right? Like I think of Zach LaVine as kind of in this situation, a more upgraded version of Bradley Beal, whereas Bradley Beal would be a worse version of Zach LaVine on a worse contract than Zach LaVine. But if you're getting 2 first-round picks in addition, the problem is you don't have the salary to then use those picks effectively. Like you don't have those mid-level salaries that you're talking about. So would it help Denver in 2 years? Yes. Would they be stuck for 2 years? Because I think he's got 2 years left on his deal. Then yes, it would be very tough.
Yeah. Anyways, that was probably the craziest one I had in there that I cut out. And I knew the reaction to it would not be great because it is the worst contract in the NBA you'd be trading for. But it was the only way I could really figure out how to get Denver multiple draft picks. And so that was one I wanted to throw out while we were kind of here on the Michael Porter stuff.
Can I give you my Denver Phoenix trade?
Of course.
Blockbuster alert. Phoenix gets Jamal Murray, Michael Porter, Peyton Watson, a 2031 first, and swaps in 2030 and 2032 for Kevin Durant, Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, and Vasily Micic.
Wow. That is a big one. So player-wise, Denver's giving up Michael Porter, Jamal, and what else?
And P. Watt.
P. Watt, okay.
They're getting back 4 guys, 4 players.
Yeah, I think it's value-wise, I think you're right. You're right in the right range. I mean, I'd have to sit down and really break it down piece by piece, but I don't have any issues with it right off the bat. That is a crazy one. Who would there be a follow-up move, or who would you be having kind of take over Jamal's spot in the rotation?
So this is where it gets a little bit sketchy because you would probably have Grayson Allen start at point guard, and then Christian Brown at the 2, KD, Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic. And then you have, for me, it would be Micic coming off the bench. You could have Russell Westbrook come back and be the starter, but then you're moving one of Grayson Allen or Christian Brown to the bench in that situation. It would be a weird deal. But you are getting Jokic and Durant together, and you are at that point, like, the other thing is KD's salary could expire, and you might actually get some like serious ability to turn over your roster after that if it doesn't work out. Of course, you're sacrificing Peyton Watson, a 2031 first, and multiple first-round swaps in that case. So not necessarily a great idea, but it's something that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to figure out some Durant stuff too, see how realistic it is for Denver. Haven't gotten this big, but it's an interesting. it is an interesting one. I would say I would do it if Denver could figure out a better situation at point guard. So even if that would mean, like, because you're so asset poor after that deal, even if that would mean giving up like a Christian Brown to get a better point guard next to those other guys, I would do it. Because then then you're talking about Durant, Jokic, and Aaron Gordon. I mean, that's a really solid front court. I think as long as you're passable in the backcourt, you're probably pretty good. So yeah, I would do it with the caveat that I would want a better point guard in there, even if it was at the cost of Christian Brown.
I think it's completely fair. Flipping Grayson Allen could be pretty easy in that situation. That mid-round, that mid-sized contract that you're thinking about, that could match a whole bunch of these other guys. Final one here, and like for everybody listening at home, that one was not really, it wasn't a joke, but like, it's obviously, we're just kind of going through the scenarios. I'm not actively campaigning to trade Jamal Murray, Michael Porter for Kevin Durant. Like, that's not what I'm trying to do. This is a mechanism to show how they could do that. The last one, though, is a little bit different. Denver gets Fred VanVleet, Jabari Smith, and some form of draft capital. Houston gets Jamal Murray and matching salary. This is the mechanism where you can't trade Michael Porter. You've tried to trade Michael Porter. It's not really working. This is the only other way, if you're not going to trade Aaron Gordon, that you can use a large salary in order to affect some sort of change. So you and I talked offline at various points about Jabari Smith and how he would be an interesting player to try to add. How would you feel about this one in particular?
I think for me, that's a slam dunk. Yes. Don't let Houston get off the phone before you call the league office. And it's probably at least partially because I am higher on Jabari Smith than the consensus is. Because look, if you do that move and then you kind of take Michael Porter to where he's an expiring, if he's still not at a point where you think you want to extend him, you trade him as an expiring, you put Jabari in your starting lineup, and now you've got a lot of money you can work with, and you could bring back rotation pieces for Michael Porter. So I would do that deal. Fred VanVleet, definitely a downgrade from Jamal, like, no doubt about it, but it's not such a brutal downgrade where you take yourself out of contention. I don't think it's that big of a downgrade. So being able to downgrade a little bit, but getting those other pieces back would definitely be a move I would do.
This is one of those moves that Houston, I think, could justify. Let's say they can't get Phoenix to budge on Devin Booker. Let's say they don't really want to go for Kevin Durant because he's way older. Jamal Murray's 28. Like, Jamal Murray is still within that range of young enough that he can continue to grow with their core, and you feel good about him. Like, even if he's not your best player in that situation, like it's Alperen Şengün or it's Amen Thompson, that he could be the kind of scorer that you need next, like, that they haven't really gotten from Jalen Green. Mm-hmm. So I think that, like, if you are Denver and you're trying to figure out how to add value to your roster, you have to get creative in ways like this. And would I do this deal? I don't know, because, like, it is such a dangerous thing to try to break up Jokic and Murray if you don't have a great mechanism behind it. But Fred VanVleet's a very smart point guard. Jabari Smith Jr. is a kind of a depressed asset who was a third overall pick at one point and could potentially develop into a starter that's better than Michael Porter Jr. So I think that there are at least some justifications to be thinking about stuff like that, especially if you are not necessarily content, no matter what you have put out publicly about where you are at as a team.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just kind of from an overall perspective, you think about Jamal and Michael Porter. If they were to look to move one of them, which all indications say they won't, but if they were to, those are the types of players that I don't think you have 29 other teams calling about. You kind of are limited to probably a handful that makes sense for each player. And then you're kind of trying to work within those parameters to get the best possible deal. And so being able to, downgrade from Jamal, but get other pieces back that make sense, I think it's a good move. Sort of a similar idea for Michael Porter. If you trade him, the odds are you're not going to get a player as good as him back in the deal, without including draft capital, of course. But hopefully it's just a slight enough downgrade that some of the flexibility you'd gain is worth it.
Any other hidden trades that you've been thinking about floating that you haven't decided to float yet?
Oh, I'm trying to think here. One that this isn't an exact trade, but sort of a framework that I think makes a lot of sense is I think Jamal makes a lot of sense in Orlando. I think he'd be really good there, and I think he fits the timeline. And I think Jalen Suggs would be an outgoing piece, but I'm not sure Denver would want Suggs as their Murray replacement. And so kind of one framework I think a lot about, but, I don't have an exact deal in mind, is a 3-team deal with Jamal going to Orlando, Suggs going to a third team, and then Denver getting a more direct Murray replacement from that third team. So there's a framework there that I think makes a lot of sense and works. It just kind of depends what that third team would be. Some people would say like an Emmanuel Quickly from Toronto might be sort of in there. And there's others. But yeah, that's kind of a framework I think a lot about.
I'm curious what you would expect, like if it wasn't Suggs, because I think Suggs is a pretty reasonable Murray replacement type. He's not the scorer that they would need, but he's certainly a better defender, certainly somebody that younger kind of propels them in that direction of an OKC or Indiana, some team that is just a little bit more energy packed, like high energy, high effort, hustle, and then kind of turning yourself into a team that's around Jokic, that hustles around Jokic. I kind of think that makes a degree of sense. But maybe it's not the right fit, and maybe they're also worried about his injury history, which could be perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
Thought about him, thought about Emmanuel Quickly. I ultimately, like, this conversation has been unbelievable, and I really enjoyed going through this and kind of laying out some different scenarios. Nuggets fans, you should know it's like none of this is probably going to happen, and the most likely scenario is that Denver just runs it back and brings back almost all, if not all, of the guys that we have discussed from a trade perspective, which sucks in some ways because I don't think that they are good enough as currently constructed and should be trying to explore some change. But they might not be in that kind of mode yet. There may not be the internal pressure yet to change things. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement there. I wouldn't expect any fireworks from Denver this offseason. Hopefully they can add a player with that mid-level exception who's a rotation piece in the playoffs as well. And hopefully add one from Deron Holmes and possibly one on a minimum deal as well. Maybe they do one through trade, doing a smaller deal, using a Zeke or Dario and maybe one of the young rotation guys. But the reality is trades are hard to pull off in the NBA. And even more so when you're as limited as Denver is in both their matching salaries and their assets. So total agreement, wouldn't expect anything big, but I think these conversations are worth having just to show that there is some creativity that can be had with the roster. And that even though Denver has always sort of been, step by step, not overreacting, I don't think it's an overreaction to say that they do need to consider some of these bigger moves in the near future.
Jake, I really appreciate your time, man. This was an incredible conversation, and I'm really glad to be able to talk about this with you, somebody who knows the league and knows the mechanisms really well. And I think we've accomplished something pretty awesome here. Thank you for hopping on, man.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to the offseason.
Awesome. Everybody, he is Jake Coyne at the Stats Squatch on Twitter. Make sure to check out his offseason like free agency guide and offseason guide for Denver. Lots of juicy stuff in there. Some of it that I stole for this show. So thank you, Jake. It's great. It's been awesome. Everybody, that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends here at Mile High Sports. Thank you for tuning in. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out. I'll talk to you guys next week.